Hello, welcome to Bianca's Book Cafe. I hope you guys have a drink and you're ready to settle in for this read along. Birdie wanted to say hi. Say hi, Brittany. So we're going to read the first chapter of my first novel, The Celestials. It's a fantasy novel, and I hope you guys like the first chapter. The first chapter is pretty short. Okay, chapter 1. Before the Celestials were killed, they had been born. Birthed by creatures of Asinithus, the gods would choose the celestial body that fit them best, and the god of death was no exception. His choice was very deliberate. Whether he made the best choice or not remains to be seen. The wind blew hard as Ralner made his way back home. His feet could not move fast enough as the harsh air pushed him back with every step. The electricity in the air was unfamiliar, as was the intense darkness caused by the overcast and the cover of night, but Ralner didn't think twice about it, despite it never being this dark in Arium. His mind was racing with thoughts of his wife and the words that he heard at the tavern that night. "Hurry home, Ralner. Your wife is in labor," a co-worker had told him after bursting into the tavern in a hurry. Sweat rolled down his forehead as he forced his way through the woods in order to get to his cabin, not from exertion, but from his heart pounding loudly in his chest. Louder and louder did it pound, and harder was it getting for him to breathe. Ralner didn't know what a father was supposed to be. He never had one that would be called a father, and he never experienced fatherhood himself. A memory flashed in his mind: white hair and unforgiving green eyes, bruises everywhere, and the distinct sound of wood on bone, of flesh on flesh. No, Ralner didn't know what a father was supposed to be. Ralner stood in the doorway, his clothes sticking to his cold, clammy skin. His long, snow-white hair, the sign of a pure elf, was tangled and windswept. It looked orange as it reflected the light of the fire. His green eyes, that echoed the father that he never got to know, never wanted to know, swept across the room and fell upon his wife. Lying in the one-room cabin on the floor in front of him lay his wife, belly swollen. Red filled his eyes as he saw her lying there, brown eyes staring into nothing. Her copper hair was a sign of impurity, and yet he had never loved a person as much as he loved Ava. Heart twisted inside of his chest, pounding louder and louder than before, he walked over to where the love of his life lay. The birth witch sat beside her, hair knotted in a tight black bun, her face echoing her hair. Her hands moved quickly around his wife, and not a word was being spoken. The firelight led up to her eyes and stayed there, not letting her eyes go. But the firelight avoided Ava's eyes, avoided her face completely. Ralner stood there, just above his love's face, and held her features in his heart, as one would cradle a baby in their arms. He could not move, her gaping mouth and faded eyes holding him there like a timber head holding a boat to the docks as waves crashed against the side of it. He could not move and did not dare to. His normally warm green eyes now echoed that of his father's, unforgiving, cruel, broken. A cry of a baby filled the otherwise tiny, empty cabin. The birth witch's hand shook as she took the baby into her arms. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. Of course something was wrong. Ava was dead. The light reflected the color of the baby's hair, flashing the color into Ralner's eyes, copper, a dark copper brown. Ralner's thoughts stayed fixated on Ava. How could she be dead? Ralner turned to the child that favored the mother that it had just killed. Childbirth was perfected by magic. No one dies from something as simple as childbirth in Asinithus. Ava's eyes held a mysterious scream, as though horrified by the last thing she saw. The baby's hair flashed in Ralner's eyes again as it struggled and cried against the birth witch's arms. Dark copper brown, impurity, the sign of a muddled elf. Ava, exactly like Ava. What happened? Ralner wanted to scream. What happened? Just this morning, Ralner saw her toothy grin before heading off to work. Just this morning, Ralner heard her excitingly tell about the coming birth of their first child. Just this morning, they were trading names back and forth across the kitchen table. Just this morning. As Ralner took a step forward, red filling his vision, the cries of the baby stopped mid-scream, as if knowing what Ralner's possible intentions were. His eyes moved upward, locking with the birth witch's, terrified, no, horrified, the same expression in Ava's eyes. "Mr. Norvir," the birth witch finally spoke. Her voice was tired, heavy, exhausted. It was without strength, and didn't hold the words above a whisper that well. If Ralner was not paying attention, her voice would have disappeared into the roaring winds crashing against the side of the stone cabin. Ralner took another step forward, the baby as silent as can be, as if waiting for Ralner to make a decision. He couldn't think straight. He couldn't see straight. Looking back at Ava, red covered her like it covered the floor. Her copper-brown hair was splayed out above her head on the ground, as if she were underwater. He looked back at the birth witch as she took the blanket off from the child that caused this bloody scene. It screamed from the cold hitting its skin, as if it were the worst feeling, as if grief didn't touch it, remorse didn't touch it. And Rauner's knees hit the pool of blood with a thud as he stared at the back of the child, his child. No one could mistake the marks that ran down the spine of his baby, black, intricate lines up and down the spine. Guilt bubbled up from his chest to his throat as he recalled what he was about to do to this child. The child's eyes opened, brown like Ava's, Ava, exactly like Ava, and just like that, those eyes held Rauner there on the floor in the blood of his love. "Her name is Rhea," the birth witch's voice said, with a bit more strength, though her hands shook as they wrapped the child back up, away from the harsh cold. Rauner didn't speak, could not speak. He had no more ties to this child any more. Her name was Rhea, just Rhea, the name that Ava gave her, though a name that would only be considered her birth name and nothing more. "Your daughter is a celestial, Mr. Noravir," the birth witch whispered. Not any celestial, Rauner knew. His daughter was the god of death. So that was chapter 1. I'll probably continue this read along, but if you want to read it before then, it is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But yeah, so that's chapter 1 of the Celestials. I hope you guys keep drinking what you've been drinking. And you guys have a fantastic day. Goodbye.